Good evening and welcome to the February 7th, 2019 meeting of the Land and Shore Committee of the Issaquah City Council. I am the chair this evening. My name is Victoria Hunt and I am with Council President Tola Martz and Council Member Stacy Goodman. On the agenda for this evening, we have 4 items, and the first item will be AB 7681, Polygon Parcel D Preliminary Plat, Issaquah Highlands Quasi-Judicial Closed Record. This is an action item for this evening. AB 7682, Proposed Amendments 2018 Comprehensive Plan, Central Issaquah Plan, IMC, and Central Standards. This is also an action item. AB 7683, Amendments to IMC 18.07.480, Community Facilities Standards regarding public buildings, and AB 7726, 2019 Docket of Comprehensive Plan Amendments, also an action item. And after each of these items, aside from the first one, which is closed record, I will take public comment if there is any members of the public that would like to comment. And with that, I will hand it over to Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager.
Good evening. So since this is a quasi-judicial matter, we're going to go through a set of questions related to that. And that is because as a quasi-judicial matter, we have to have an appearance of fairness, and we are required to follow certain procedural and substantive due process. So I would ask that the committee members read through this series of questions, and then I'll ask you for your answers in a moment. Who answers no to all the questions? Okay, great. And then the other piece of this has to do with ex parte contacts. All the decision-making around this permit needs to be done on the record and as part of official processes. And so has anyone had any contacts, conversations, communications outside of this forum about this permit?
No.
Nope. No. Great. Does anyone wish to challenge any of the committee members? Hearing none. The other piece I wanted to touch on is the difference between a preliminary plat and a site development permit. The only reason I touch on this is this permit has a very high level of detail beyond what we typically see with a preliminary plat. I'll discuss this a little more, but I did want to introduce this. As you can see with a typical preliminary plat, it is predominantly about the subdivision of land into parcels, lots, and tracts. And we're not usually reviewing what's on them, except to the extent that it's necessary to make sure that the parcel, lot, or tract is sized appropriately. Whereas with a site development permit, we are reviewing the actual design of the activities, the spaces, and the uses. So now we'll begin the actual presentation portion related to the plat. I did want to provide a little bit of background. As you may remember, in 2017, the council approved the Polygon Affordable Housing Development Agreement, the 9th major modification to the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement, and the first major modification to the WSDOT Development Agreement. And as part of this, Polygon had asked for their West Ridge property out here in Issaquah Highlands they wanted to add 100 TDRs. And as part of the council's negotiation with them, the 50 affordable housing units on Parcel D were swapped for market rate units from the West Ridge property, and that's how we both find ourselves here this evening and why this is being reviewed under the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement. Second, just to, as a sort of getting close to the end of an era, I wanted to point out that short plats, which are 0 to 4 lots, are administratively reviewed, but long plats or preliminary plats with 5 or more lots are a public process in the city of Issaquah. And so some development agreements like Issaquah Highlands and Talus use a 2-step process of first the permit goes to the UVDC for a public hearing at which the record is created, and then to the council for a decision. That's the process we're using tonight. Other parts of the city use a different process. You may or may not go to a commission, but the decision is made by hearing examiner. So thought that might help just introduce what we're doing this evening. The context for Parcel D, it's shown in green here. It is surrounded by a lot of residential uses, including attached townhomes, single family to the south, and rental units to the northeast. Forest Ridge was also developed by the applicant maybe 10 years ago, and this will be an extension of, they think that of this mostly as an extension of the area. Central Park and Grand Ridge Elementary are not far to the east, along with the possible future campus of Bellevue College, and Grand Ridge Plaza is close by to the west. To give a sense of what the site looks like, there are a series of photos. This presentation is a sort of updated version of the one that was given to the UVDC, so there are a few changes from what was in your packet. This first image is looking down College Drive towards the site, and this was in 2018. But you can see in 2014, it's where it's got its name, Stump Park. Then there are a series of pictures standing close to the intersection of 14th Place and Falls Drive. First, looking towards Falls Drive along the side of the site, then looking across the site towards Avalon Windhaven, and then looking to the sort of west along 14th Place. And the last picture is taken down below from Sunset Walk, looking up the hill to the site, which is this area right here. So you get a sense of that hillside that forms one edge of the project. In terms of the specifics of the site, it's just over an acre with 10 lots and 2 tracks. One of the tracks is for recreation and open space. The other tract is a VUNERF that provides both pedestrian and vehicular access to the center of the site. And there is also a neighborhood walk that connects from inside the site out to the east. Everything at Issaquah Highlands is developed under a particular neighborhood type. In this case, it's house and garden. And as I mentioned, there's quite a slope to the west. In terms of proposed streets, almost all the streets are existing. This includes Falls Drive, College Drive, and 14th Place. There's some minor changes being made along the edge of Parcel D to Falls Drive, but otherwise those streets are all constructed and remaining the same. As I mentioned, there is a VUNERF or shared surface that is serving the inside of the site. So these 6 homes receive their vehicular access via driveway from Falls Drive, these 4 from the interior of the site. And there is some adjacent parallel parking. There's a bit along Falls Drive currently, and some on the opposite side from Parcel D on 14th Place. This just gives you a sense of what it actually looks like at this time. Parking, not part of a plat review, but always discussed with a plat review. Polygon has learned that over the years and always provides a lot of information about parking. In this case, each garage has 2 side-by-side parking stalls. That meets all the required parking per the development agreement. The 2 orange stalls are on the garage apron, and those could be guest parking or convenience parking. There was quite a bit of a review of the changes to the curb line of Falls Drive. The orange line represents, sorry, my mouse just disappeared. The orange line represents the existing curb. The green, do these colors show up? Sort of. The green right here is an acceptable change to the curb line. The red are 2 changes that we do not accept. One is right here, and the other is right here. That is because they would allow parking too close to intersections or crosswalks. The proposed changes would leave one parallel parking stall on Falls Drive. Currently, there are about 4. Pedestrian system, all the surrounding existing streets have, oh, I'm sorry. Did you want me to go back?
The parking, you said the applicant proposed changes, that would only leave 1?
Yes.
And the city accepted changes that would leave a total of 4. So say that again.
Thank you for, that isn't what I meant to say, so thanks for the opportunity to clarify. Yes, based on the driveways that are proposed along here, there would only be 1 legal parallel parking stall. Currently, on Falls Drive, there are 4 parallel parking stalls.
Okay, because of the driveways, I see, okay.
Yeah. Pedestrian system. The existing streets around the site have sidewalks on both sides. In addition, Falls Drive and College Drive have bike lanes on both sides of the street. The applicant has proposed this shared use VUNERF, which will serve both pedestrians and cars, and additionally has provided this neighborhood walk, which is a kind of shortcut to facilitate the connection between this intersection and the interior of the site. One thing that's kind of interesting, and we haven't seen before, but we think is a really great idea, is that sort of gray-blue lines that are shown here. Each backyard on this side of the site has a gate and stepping stones that provide access to this neighborhood walk to give a shortcut both to the open space, to the mail kiosk, and just to the interior of the community. Yeah.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. The VUNERF,
Yes.
is it consistent, the width, for example, is it consistent with other areas of Issaquah Highlands that might be considered VUNERFs or alleys?
So actually, it's a little bit wider. It's 20 feet instead of 18. So 18 is allowed, but over the years, we have learned some lessons and have moved to the full 20 feet that the fire department prefers.
Okay, thanks.
Does the trail connect to the Wooner? So
Yes,
you could get from the trail to the Wooner?
Right. So this is pretty much all on grade. I believe there's some steps in here, and this little area right here is to allow cars and trucks to turn around in the VUNERF, but it also provides a connection between the trail and the VUNERF. Does that make?
Is the neighborhood walk concrete?
Yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
So the concrete connects all the way to the concrete?
Yes, all concrete. And just to dive in a little bit more, if we look here, the end of Tract A is right here, this line. So when we look at this portion between lots 4 and 5, this is actually an easement on the 2 lots. As a neighborhood walk, it needs a 10-foot wide corridor, which they have provided, but the borders of the trail do not allow fences. So Lot 4 has a fence along the edge of the border, Lot 5 does not. And you can sort of see that here. This is an error that is shown in the section showing a fence on Lot 4 or 5. There wouldn't be one. However, the backyard will have a fence outside of the border so that it has a fully enclosed backyard. The UVDC is always very interested in block lengths, so we always include that as part of our presentation. So from Park Drive to College Drive is just over 300 feet. From College Drive to the intersection of 14th Place is just under 200. From the VUNERF down to the trail that provides a connection out into the open space and down the hill is quite a long block, but that is a result of this slope that made further connections not possible. Open space and parks. This is one of those examples where we have a high level of detail for a plat, but it is useful in explaining how this area would be used. This is the open space. They are creating an overlook sort of plaza area with stairs heading down to it. And they've shown some of the site furniture and activities that they would put in this area. Following the platting process, assuming it is approved, we would do a small land use permit that would be jointly reviewed with the Architectural Review Committee, looking at the specific activities and landscape to further refine it to serve this neighborhood.
Is there any way or plan to get from that area down all the way to the lower ground level?
Down to the down the slope? No. We looked at that, and we tried for a long time to make that happen. It's just so expensive to be added on to just 10 lots that there was just not the nexus and proportionality to justify it.
I have a question that adds to Councilmember Goodman's question. I thought that there would be stairs going down, so what happens at the end of the?
So there are, the Wunnerf is coming out here on grade. Just past these two driveways, there would be a staircase down to the terrace, but the terrace would be the end of that connection. And you would have to come back out here and either head north to Park Drive or down along 14th Place to the trail that connects. This trail does connect down to the Falls Pond, Sunset Pond area. But as I mentioned, this is probably 1,000 feet to connect, and it was just, and then we also looked at providing just a straight connection to see if that would improve the cost and the buildability, and that was still quite expensive relative to just 10 homes.
I'm sorry, what's the status of the terrace? It's open space, or it's private? It's a private terrace for the folks who live there?
Well, let me just skip ahead. There are three I'm going to get to your answer. It's just going to take me a second. So there are 3 easements that we focused on as part of the plat. One of them had to do with the way this was originally designed. Tract A stopped here, and then Tract B with the open space was here, and there was no connection over the private lots. Staff proposed an easement. The commission wanted the Wunnerf and Tract A to continue all the way to the park, and that was the ultimate decision. And so this condition 3 was revised by the commission. We also, the easement over this part for the trail was not to anyone in specific, so it will be to the city, therefore allowing the public to use that as well. And then finally, condition 31 requires that there be an easement over tracts A and B that would allow the public to use it. So like with every other plat and sort of multifamily site development permit or commercial permit, when we have these kind of open space areas, they are initially for the immediate community, but we also want everyone to be able to share each other's. And so this would allow other people to come and use the plaza.
Thank you.
Yeah. Design enhancement, this is a pretty common thing that we include with plats. Because we often have homes with exposed sides, either because of corners, the way it's laid out, or because of trails. So each one of these, blue reads very gray up there, each one of these sort of gray bars indicates a facade that will either have some kind of additional enhancement. It might be a wraparound porch, or it might be a sort of front facade level of detail. But that's to ensure that this doesn't feel like you're looking at the side of a building. A couple of other points to make. As I mentioned, there was a high level of detail, some of which we were not able to review within the context of the plat. For instance, some of these walls may have houses loaded onto them, and that needs to be part of the building permit design to make sure the wall is able to take the load from the house. In addition, some of these walls cross over lot lines, and we want to make sure that they can be replaced in the future, and they're laid out and/or built in a way that would allow that to happen if it was necessary. So we added Condition 7, which basically clarifies what we've reviewed and that some other review of things in the plat will take place with future construction permits. Driveway design, the Lot 1, which is this lot right here, as you can see, it has its driveway off of 14th Place. In working both with the Engineers and Development Services and Public Works Engineering, there was a concern that this driveway is too close to the VUNERF. For instance, it might create confusion with someone mistakenly turning into one when they think they're going to the other. It also struck us as not very pedestrian-friendly because it's effectively a 40-foot curb cut. And the development agreement talks about having inappropriate termini of roads, and we didn't really want the garage doors to be that. So we worked with the applicant to look at reorienting the garage so that instead of being served from 14th Place, it will be served from the VUNERF, and an additional parking area for those 2 extra parking stalls that would have been on the apron would be adjacent to the garage. Lastly,
Sorry, can I ask,
Yeah.
does whoever buys that lot, do they have to set aside the outside spots parking, or could they, if they wanted to turn that into a garden instead, could they?
Yeah, because as I mentioned, the 2 spots in the garage meet the requirements. However, there isn't a lot of guest parking. And so, there is on-street parking in the neighborhood. We did hear from a lot of residents of the neighborhood that the on-street parking is very popular. So we would want to have those 2 spaces available for the homeowner, but you're right, they could make that choice because that is not required parking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Finally, there was a lot of public comment with the desire of not developing this property. Certainly, people across the street or adjacent to it like the idea of it remaining a park. One of the things that we attempted to explain to them was that originally Issaquah Highlands was all of this property. This whole area was set aside, as well as many of the critical areas within the city limits. And so basically every piece of developable property within the city and the Issaquah Highlands project was allowed to develop if they bought the entitlement to do so. So this property has that entitlement. There was part of the confusion, and we were never really able to track it down, but on the King County site, it says this property belongs to the City of Issaquah Parks Department. That's really unusual because no piece of property belongs to a department. Now, they may be assigned to a department to maintain it, but not as a thing that belongs to them. And we also pointed out that, obviously there could be new residents, but we had quite a bit of conversation in the community with Forest Ridge when the TDR Affordable Housing Development Agreement was prepared, because the neighborhood came to us and said, we don't want 50 affordable housing units. That's too dense. It's out of character. And that was the council's decision, was to better serve those affordable housing units and to respect sort of the character that has developed in this area, that just 10 market rate houses would go on this property and that affordable would be transferred. So while the residents were disappointed, we did try to help them understand some of the things that have led to the reason that this is being developed. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Do we have questions? I have a few. Okay. Firstly, when you were showing the pictures of what is there now, the 2018, it looks like there is there anything there now? It looks like there's a lot of vegetation.
Just a lot of vegetation, and I think it's all volunteers. I don't think we've planted anything.
Is the parcel designation as Parks Department fixed on the parcel viewer?
No, because it pulls from King County, and I had our GIS person contact them, and they said that's the way it got reported to them, and King County is not inclined to change things. So unfortunately, it still says that until it's transferred to Polygon.
Okay, and at what point in the process would it then be corrected on?
Well, the ownership would switch to Polygon at the time when they're allowed to purchase it, and so then it wouldn't show as being Parks Department because it would show Polygon as the owner.
And in your presentation, you described this housing type as house and garden. House and garden. So I wondered if you could describe that and then also explain if the houses near this, adjacent to it, are in the same house and garden.
That's a great
type.
question. Yes, Forest Ridge that Polygon developed many years ago is also house and garden. The house and garden neighborhood type is kind of like a traditional, say, Wallingford neighborhood. It's not necessarily house-oriented, but that it's got lawns, it's got large trees, it's not with buildings set really close to the street. Of course, I'm blanking out. It's got more sort of variation between the houses or the buildings from each one lot to the other, which was part of the reason why having these lots at an angle was considered a plus, because it would make it a little more diverse and interesting as you drove along there. The landscape tends to, as I said, be lawn and trees and trellises, and the street system can use streets, but you wouldn't have really long straight streets, so that's where having something like the Wunderf, which has a more curvilinear street system, seems appropriate.
I think you answered this, but Forest Rim and the other neighborhoods that are adjacent are also in the same style, right?
I'm going to be doing this from memory. Forest Ridge is house and garden. I believe Avalon Windhaven is too. Sunset Walk, I think, is a different neighborhood type, traditional townscape. And I believe I think almost everything around here that's kind of up on this hill is house and garden. But then as you come down, so this project, this part of the area, and Sunset Walk I believe are all traditional townscape. So along Park Drive is a little more formal, and house and garden is a little more informal. So that's some of the distinction between the two.
I have a question about the HOA. So it says under one of the conditions that if the IHCA will not accept the dedication and maintenance obligations, the applicant must have the Plat's property owners retain responsibility through a separately formed HOA or join the Forest Ridge HOA. This will be confirmed with the final plat. But then I also was under the impression that there aren't separate HOAs, that they're all under the Issaquah, the IHCA.
So it's a great question, and we talked about this some at the UVDC. All of the residential areas are under the IHCA, but then there are some areas that have sub-HOAs. I was under the impression, I thought I had asked it, but I guess I misunderstood, and I thought that Forest Ridge had its own HOA, but it doesn't. It's under the IHCA. So the choices would be either the IHCA accepts this, or they form their own HOA. The IHCA has already indicated that they are willing to accept the maintenance responsibilities of the various parcels here, but we will have it confirmed in writing as part of the final plat process.
Okay. It may be moot then, but it does, I think it still says in the
Yes,
conditions. about
it
this.
does, but it's an option that we can't exercise, but I don't think that it causes any problems to the implementation of the plat.
Okay. I have a few more. So at the end of the Wonerf to get to the terrace, is there a gate or something? And then how do people know that you can continue going past there to the terrace area? Because I think that it's in keeping with the nature of the Highlands to have these sort of areas that are shared for gathering, and this image is inviting, but I wonder, how do you know that it's there when you're walking down the Wonerf?
So there will be some wayfinding that will be appropriate and necessary. There will also be in addition to the stairs, there are 2 piers on either side, and there will be, there'll be some trees and things that are here that will kind of be an indication of it. So I think between some of the sort of design elements, you'll see that there's, these piers that are framing something, and then wayfinding, I think those 2 will indicate that there is something out there.
And would there be a gate or a fence?
Oh,
or
no, there would not be,
nothing?
there would not be a gate, because there's not we just wouldn't want a car to continue down there. So there would be some kind of device if a car lost control or something, that would prevent it from going down the stairs, but not something that would prevent the general public from going down there.
Okay, yeah, and that ties into, I think, my last question, which is about, it's a dead end, the Wonerf, and so I do know that generally you try to avoid dead ends, and so what's the reason for why it couldn't
Right.
do something?
So you're absolutely right that kind of general expectation at Issaquah Highlands is that we have an interconnected street system. I was looking and reading through the staff report. One of the things that it says is we only use dead ends in special circumstances. And so because of the topography and the fact that there are these built-out neighborhoods on either side, it was not possible to have the street connect through. But you're absolutely right, that is our first choice, and we do look for opportunities to do that. But we're unable to do it here.
Member Goodman.
Thanks. A little bit of a follow-up to Council Member Hunt's question about how it's, what the ownership is on title, and that is, can you explain a little about the zoning and what it's zoned and why or why not it needs to be zoned a certain way for this? We now have underlying zoning, new underlying zoning, but this would be under the development agreement?
This is reviewed under the development agreement, but the replacement regs, we did have a sense of this layout at the time when we were doing the replacement regs, and so there actually is a snapshot of the plat which goes into effect if it is final platted. So the map will automatically update if the final plat is approved. And so the property is zoned UV Single Family 1, which means there's 1 unit per lot.
With a maximum of 11?
No, because once it's platted, there'll be 10 lots, and you just get 1.
Oh, I see.
And so,
So if you tore it down, you could only build 10?
You tore down all 10.
If you could only build 10. So, but prior to that, explain how it is that up to 11 are allowed on this property.
so that was the assignment of the Affordable Housing Development Agreement, allowed actually up to 11. They only felt that 10 was appropriate in this location. For undeveloped properties in the replacement regs, there was, we had every single parcel in both Tallis and Issaquah Highlands had a zone and a zoning cap. And then for undeveloped parcels, we showed how much undeveloped entitlement they had. And 10 were assigned to this property so that we could transition from the development agreement into the replacement regs once this was built.
Okay. And then my last two questions may be outside the scope of what needs to be reviewed under the preliminary plat, but we've already talked about them, or at least they're both in the record. So can you go back to the slide that shows, I think it's 4 and 5, and talked about the fencing along the trail? So can you explain again what areas would not have fencing?
Oh, sure. So Lot 4, this sort of line with square dots, that's the fence
Okay.
for Lot 4, because that is outside the required border for the trail. But the required border for the trail goes right up to the edge of Lot 5. So they have both the backyard fence running north-south, and then they will have one just outside the border that will finish enclosing the backyard. But there will only be this landscape as sort of a separation between the trail and the house.
So is there anything that would prevent future owners of Lot 5 from continuing, making some sort of a taller border? So arborvitae is pretty common in the Highlands. Let them grow a little bit taller, and then you actually have a fence. Is there anything that would prevent those owners from putting something like that on their own lot?
Yes, during final, we've had to do this in other locations where we limit either the fence or the plantings to a specific height. Now, who goes, I mean, I have had to go to homeowners and say, you're out of compliance.
Well, assuming it's at the appropriate height, which is probably
Like-
5 or 6 feet or something?
Oh, no, it's, all of these fences are low. These are like 42 inch, I believe.
Why do you have to limit the height on that, on the greenery, or if you put a fence, if Lot 5 puts a fence on their own property, or greenery to create a hedge fence, why does it have to be limited to 42 inches?
Just the way the development agreement is written, it says there will be, along the trails in this neighborhood, that it will only be low hedges or fences. And so both the fences and hedges would be limited to, about this tall, which is 42 inches.
Does that same rule apply to the red parts of the fence there? What about on the back? Really?
Because there's a trail there. So that's a great question. Thank you for helping me
It doesn't
understand what you
seem
were
like that.
asking.
It doesn't seem like that's what I see when I'm walking around.
And you're right. We've gotten smarter about how we plat and the restrictions that we write. This is a particularly tight plat where the trails and things are, would be, really feel like a canyon or a gauntlet is the term that's used. So some of the fences, along these backsides and things will be able to be a full 6-foot fence. But the ones that are along these trails that are serving the interior of the plat and then along here as well would be those lower fences. So it'll be important that, A, that we get it right in the final plat, and B, that those fences are in place when sales are going on so that homeowners understand what they're buying.
Right, they don't
We
have
don't
that.
want people to be surprised.
Yeah, so exactly. Okay, my last question is, in terms of the public comment that was included in the record, the ones that were notable to me had to do with traffic and speed of the traffic, which is not new in that neighborhood. It seems to be an ongoing issue in many parts of the Highlands. And and I'm just saying this because we're here in a public meeting, is it would seem to me that because of the number of people who are concerned about that, it might be one of those areas that the city, adds to its list of possible neighborhoods for traffic calming, just looking into possible traffic calming in that area.
So, and I think that's a great thing to pass on to Public Works Engineering. I will say, in the past, this is not the first time that people have complained about Falls Drive. And in the past, when they have done traffic studies, and this is outside the Plat, so, because this wasn't one of our topics, when they have done traffic studies, the traffic speeds were within acceptable ranges. But that doesn't mean they are now. And so, and I do take your point that traffic calming might help get it, ensure it's more consistently at the appropriate speed.
And even just a few speeding cars can make the neighborhood seem unsafe, or that there are more speeding cars than.
Well, and frankly, 30 miles an hour feels pretty fast
Yep.
if you've got little kids.
Yep. That's all I have.
I have one more. I noticed in the conditions that there is a condition number 30 of the findings of fact document that says incorporate children as integral user of Tract B. And so I wondered if I could get more information about how children would be integrated as integral user of Tract B.
Well, we aren't looking for big toys, especially in such a small space. We want it. We want people of any age to use it. But currently, it was mainly tables and chairs and some plantings, and we felt that it could be water, it could be movable art pieces, it could be edible landscape. There are things that you can do in which children can engage and interact with it, where it doesn't set it aside just for children. And we've worked with Polygon to do this before, and that's the kind of thing that we would be looking for. That's the kind of refinement that I was thinking of, that we would be working with the ARC to identify what's appropriate and which the ARC is willing to maintain.
If they became part of the homeowners association, would the homeowners association ultimately maintain that, or?
The IHCA maintains virtually everything up
Okay.
there.
I don't have anything else. I didn't see a specific motion in here, but I would imagine that the motion is to recommend, refer, or have it go back to the full council with a recommendation to approve as presented. And in guessing that's going to be the committee's will, then the next question is whether it goes on regular or consent. Is there a public hearing already?
Yes, that was at the UVDC.
Okay, closed record, can't have any more. And so that if it was on consent, then it would be up to other council members to pull it down if they had any questions.
Yeah, I thought I thought when after it got referred, it got updated, but as part of the packet, but it didn't. So I agree, that would be the motion that we would anticipate.
And which date are you thinking of?
So it's, well, if I want to be nice to myself, I would say March 4. But I could try for February 19. It's really up to the committee. I mean, there's no significant update. And so I would do that tomorrow to prepare it for the February 19th packet, if that was the committee's preference.
We could also say either or, whatever.
Either or?
Yeah.
For what?
So I'll just make the motion, and it move to recommend, to move this back to the full council with a recommendation that this agenda be approved as presented, the date that it goes back to the full council being either February 19th or March 4th. I don't think it matters to us.
Okay.
Need a second, then we need to approve.
Second.
Yep, all those in favor, I guess. Aye.
Aye.
Aye?
And then I had asked consent or regular. It's already been through a public hearing, closed record.
I think consent is fine.
Okay. And certainly someone can pull it down
Yes.
if you want to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work on that, Lucy. Our next item is AB 7682, Proposed Amendments 2018 Comprehensive Plan, Central Issaquah Plan, IMC, and Central Standards. This is presented by Trish Heinonen, Policy Planning Manager.
It's going to take me just a minute to get loaded up.
Lucy?
So Trish, you didn't get the memo.
I'm sorry.
Exactly. It was maroon and black day for all the planners.
This could go. I was going to say, uh-oh, we're not doing the comp plan? Okay, that memo,
You
sorry.
guys were all dressed the same. Navy. Is that Navy? Oh.
We're the team, we're the, now I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Kidding. So, Happy New Year. We're here for the 2018 Comprehensive Plan Amendments. You guys have done this many, many times before, and the process for these, just to remind you, is you approved a docket in the beginning of last year for 2018. We went through with Planning Policy Commission, these are the dates that they went through, the land use element, parks element, transportation element. They did an amazing amount of work. They actually did a special meeting with the school district folks about urban schools and compact schools and the policies involved with that and the definitions, because we really wanted to be sure that we really were really pondering and really thoughtful when we put those together to make sure that they could live with it and that we could live with it. And so there was a special singular meeting that was just with the school district and a representative from the board. So that was very successful. I'm just going to give you a summary and then of all of them, and then if you have questions, I have my team here to answer any, if you want to get in the weeds on anything, we're happy to help you through, because there were quite a few amendments this year. We did all the regular things that you're used to with the land use element, population, housing, job data, the land use designation map. We updated the transfer of development rights policy to reflect the latest in the sunsetting of the Highlands development agreement to be specific on where they could be used there. We added policy direction for building on slopes. We added policy direction for prioritizing acquisition of forested hillsides, and that turned out really well before this even got adopted. And again, we created policies for compact and urban schools. This would be a quick flash of the targets didn't change, but I thought I'd put them up there just for a reference. And the updated housing targets were 85% there, and we're 35% towards the job targets, both of those given to us by the state. So there's more information in your packet, but this is just sort of a glimpse of the final. Yes?
I think it isn't shown here, but I think that one of the changes was that it used to report new units constructed, and now it has new units permitted. Is that the
Right.
case? And so I wondered why that changed from constructed to permitted.
You get to come up right away.
And is it
No, it's just, so the numbers that we use for these are from OFM. And honestly, this was my first year to do the OFM stuff. I've always done PSRC. They use constructed, which means it's totally finalized and on the ground. OFM uses permitted, so anything that's been issued a building permit. So we changed it to be consistent with OFM. That's all.
Isn't it also so that we we're not guessing as to what's coming. I mean, if it's permitted, it's going to be here. So let's just print like actuals rather than looking like we're a couple years behind every time we.
Right, well, if it's permitted, it could still expire and may not happen. So that was another reason that we wanted to use constructed instead. But in trying to be consistent year after year and keep OFM's numbers, then we had to move it to permitted. Yeah, I agree. If it's constructed, it's on the ground, but this is for consistency.
Okay, so I want to stay with this page a little bit because these are telling statistics. So we're 85% there for housing. So I think my question would be, if we just keep on doing what we're doing, then we are going to be way above our housing targets, way before we get there. So do we have are we talking about that?
I would say that in the strategic plan discussions that you all were in yesterday, and I'm glad you're feeling better, but you missed a very rousing discussion of the job housing balance. How do you get them in line? Do you get them in line?
Right.
Do you mess with the market? Do you provide incentives? So there's a lot of discussion in the strategic plan growth and development yesterday. I'm not sure where that will go. So far in the comp plan, we don't have anything incentive or, carrot or stick to change how we're achieving those, but we're certainly open to whatever comes out of. There is, later on in the docket process, that's 2 agenda bills from now, we put a placeholder that if something comes out of the strategic plan this year that we need to put in the comp plan, that we wanted to be open and have a placeholder for it, in case that's something that comes out.
So that was that was a public meeting yesterday that's recorded, and it wasn't televised. So only the people who happened to be there saw that. So that, yeah.
It's not televised?
No, it was recorded, and it'll be
okay.
put up on
Sorry, didn't know
YouTube.
that.
So the comp plan has our targets that are adopted from King County, and, all this is doing is tracking what's happening, right?
Right.
If the council wants to have a discussion about kind of where we are in our 20-year target for housing and employment, and why there's a different gap for both of those. That's definitely something we could do. It probably isn't a comp plan conversation, but it would need to find another forum.
Sure, I think it's absolutely necessary that we need another forum, in my opinion. And I just didn't want to go beyond this page without acknowledging that the statistics are very telling, and that we have a central Issaquah plan that depends on the numbers that we have stated for both housing and jobs. And when we are that far ahead on one and that far behind, so to speak, I guess, behind the other, then it's a conversation that we need to have to make sure that we don't have a plan that cannot be successful because we are not able to make those numbers. So I think it is a critical conversation that we need to have. And yeah, I'm aware that we're talking about that with part of the strategic plan, but I wasn't able to be there for the second half of that conversation. So,
Any other questions on this one? This is one of our favorites, we call it the pop chart, and this is updated from OFM for 2018 numbers in April, and then we extrapolate based on what we know about the villages, all the other things that we know, and we try to estimate where we'll be in 2031, knowing that, estimates are never right. Sometimes they're close, but not always. But this is something the state requires us to do each year with their updated housing, population and housing numbers. The transportation element amendments, the 6-year TIP goes in. We had to update the commute trip reduction because of the state changed some pieces. We revised the Sound Transit 3 policies, and we also changed figure T4, the non-motorized map, to make sure that the trail that is described in the development agreement, I believe it's the Lakeside development agreement, is also in the comprehensive plan, so that it shows that it's our intent to have the trail and the trail connection. Issaquah, Central Issaquah Plan also updated the Commute Trip Reduction Act information. That was a fun one. We added definitions. It's called a non-drive-alone trip instead of a single occupancy trip, which to me, why would you put a longer word in for something? But that's what they did. So we updated those. And the Parks and Rec, because we had the Park Strategic Plan, we moved all of the policies in that plan into our element, as we do when they do their 6-year update. We're also going to be reviewing the goals and policies this coming year, because you all asked that, PPC asked you all to consider letting them review the goals and policies again, and you did ask them to do that as part of the Park Strategic Plan. So that's being worked on right now. The implementation strategies in Appendix B, we updated those and prioritized those. We tried to do it by year. They're not budget guaranteed. They're just a guideline for staff on when we think they might get done, but they don't require the council to budget for them. They used to be a long list of things we wanted to do, sort of a wish list, but we really wanted to try and tighten them up, sort of like the Old Town Sub-Area Plan, where we tried to put some years into when they would happen. So that was Appendix B. The capital facilities element, there's only a couple pieces that we updated because we're still in the midst of our impact fee work to update the whole piece. But we did, I'm sorry.
Could you go back one slide? I just had a clarifying question on the
Yes.
implementation strategies. So what is the scope of the strategies that are being specified as you?
Right, a few years back, when we had a big clean out of the plant, 2015, thank you, my date person, we had to completely overhaul the comp plan, and we took all the implementation out and put it in Appendix B and just kept the goals and policies and discussion in the actual GMA plan. It was just a big wish list of things. It was update the parks plan, it was just many, many pages of just projects and programs that the city wanted to do that were pulled out of the original plan. And so for this, we wanted to organize them by element, by which sets of years they might happen, like when is the water plan coming up again, when is the stormwater plan coming up again, instead of just being in a big list. So we tried to make some sense out of it for us, so we could actually use it as next year we should be budgeting or thinking about budgeting for, the stormwater plan that's coming this year, those kinds of things.
Thanks.
Again, the only thing we changed in the capital facilities element is we added the capital needs for fire service, and we added the school district info to make it really clear that how their capital facility plan, that's 6 years, how that fits into how we do our work with their impact fees. And we also updated the map. The utilities and public services element we updated because, as you well know, the water plan is coming through. And since you've seen it, although maybe some of you have seen it more recently than PPC has seen it, there was one change to the 3.1.1 assumptions of other jurisdictions. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 word change in parentheses, or use some other method that was added because of Sam Platt's comments that they gave us to the policy. Because as you know, we have an interlocal agreement with them about how and when and if assumption could be taken. And they wanted the policy to show that it might not just be an assumption, it might be another way or another avenue. So that's new since your packets come out. The next steps, you get to review it today. If you have questions or want us to do some research or whatever, we can come back next month. We allocated 2 months because it's pretty big. Comp plan amendments are always like, there's a lot of pieces. If you're done with them tonight, that'd be fabulous too. We're fine either way. And then it goes back to council. We're thinking at last it would be March.
Do you have any questions?
I do.
Councilmember Goodman.
Do you? Okay, for page 130 of the packet, it is land use policy A7. about respecting the topographic character of each site.
A7, yes.
And so I wondered, there's a whole bunch of shoulds in here, and is there some reason that we shouldn't change those to shall?
That's a really good question. This was taken right out of the Architectural Urban Design Manual. I wish Lucy hadn't left. Because we had heard from council that they liked that so much that they wanted it actually as a policy citywide. So we pulled it right out of there and put it in here. If you wanted to make it stronger, it would be different than the one in the Architectural Design Manual, but wouldn't.
Put it up, Trish, by chance?
Well, technology savvy, I know. Do the comp plan.
The reason I'm asking is if we're placing an emphasis on trying to respect the topographic character of each site, then I don't know that and it's regarding hillside and slope sites, I don't think we do that very well by just putting in language that says, well, you should do it, but we're not going to make you. And so maybe one of the answers is, well, we can say shall all we want to, but if it only says should in the other guidelines, then
The first one could be a shall, so this shall be done through building design and siting, that's fine. Trees, that's fine, the next should could be a shall. I know, sorry. Am I on? Here we go. Grading. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
The intent is that shall happen.
okay.
So all
Because it
three?
was consultant-generated language, they may not have been as sensitive to the shoulds and shalls as we
Okay.
are.
So all three
Yeah,
go to
that's
shalls?
fine.
Excellent.
I think because the introductory, the first sentence says, respect it by making as small a change to the environment as necessary and practical. So that part sets it up. And then all that's below it are ways to do that. And
Great.
it's fine that those are shalls, because the first part of it gives at least a little bit of flexibility, which I think is needed. So,
Great.
yeah.
Okay, and then land use policy H5 on page 136.
All I know is that's housing. Housing.
Yes, okay,
Okay.
we're there.
After the first word limit, it says transfer of development rights. This is just technical, but just shorten that to TDR because you've already shortened it to TDR, so our references to transfer development rights just need to be TDR.
Oh, yeah.
And then, but my substantive question is this already in code?
I believe it is through the end of DAs, isn't it?
Hang on. Yes, so we already changed the map as part of 1821B. It's B, because A is Central, B is Highlands, C is Talus. So we did the code already. So the policy is, I think, catching up with the code revision that was done with the replacement regulations.
So
Does that make sense?
So here are my comments, and you might have to take it back and look at it. The policy is to continue the use of TDRs on a site-specific basis. And I think, do we need to say the sending and the receiving sites shall follow the process of review?
No.
That would be in code.
Yes.
And if we've already done the yellow part in code, then it seems to me that we only need the first sentence.
I would agree. Less is more.
Yeah. Table L5 on page
Ooh,
140,
top chart.
141. Just because it's a big table with lots of numbers, I would like you to tell me what you want me to take away from this table. What's in here that's important for us to know or the public to know?
You want to take a shot at that since it's yours?
You're supposed to say, no, I'm the date person, not the table person.
She's the number.
Yeah, what date did you
I'm a
create
number
it?
person, but this is a state requirement too,
Okay.
that they have us project out for 20 years. And it's just to give us an idea, it's used by different consultants when they look at our populations, you know, their estimates as to what's going to happen. So consultants use it when they come in and we use it when we do code amendments. I think,
Is there anything that stuck out to you when you were updating it?
no. Yeah, I mean, we did adjust it this year for urban villages since the DA's ended. We went through specifically with the people who work on those, you know, Lucy and others who work specifically with the villages to find out what's coming through and when. So I think that is probably more accurate than it's been in the past because they're almost built out, and so we know exactly what's coming, and we really know when it's coming. So I think that was more accurate this year. Central, we've got a good feel for what's going on there right now, so I think that's probably pretty close to what's going on. There were no jarring things that stood out to me, though.
Okay. Nothing new to you?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I ask a question on that table?
Sure.
Since we're looking at it. So on that table, under the potential annexation areas, I just wonder why, so there's only one, and so then it has that one called out, and then it has the subtotal for that area. So I just wondered, is that a requirement that it has to be called out?
The PAA?
Yeah.
It is a requirement, yes.
Okay. The subtotal of one is exactly the same, it's just all the numbers appear
It used to be so many, but
twice.
now we're down to one.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the question around PAAs, can you go to page 144 of the packet, which is the map?
Oh, the PAA map?
No, it's the land use designations map.
Oh, okay, because
There we go.
mine's different numbered than yours.
There we go.
Okay.
That's- oh,
Oops, bigger, you want it? Okay.
sure. So I never noticed before. Is that a PAA at the upper end of the Highlands?
That's such a great question. It is not a PAA in our world. It is not in the city's official PAAs. However, it is not in the city limits, and King County is assessing whether or not it oughtn't to be in our PAAs. And so we're just starting that conversation. In fact, I don't know if Keith's gotten an invite.
Can you show where that is on the map, so
Um,
folks who are watching?
You can point with the
Okay.
mouse, Trish.
Oh, can I? That's
Yeah.
so fun. Yes, I didn't think that worked. Can you
So,
see this?
so the problem
Oh, you can.
is the UGA boundary doesn't match. That little area in between the red and the heavy black line is King County-owned open space that was part of the conveyance from Issaquah Highlands. And as you can see, it's there, and it actually doesn't exactly match on the north end either. So to go right up there,
Here?
there's a little bit of gap up there too. So there's a little bit of area where they didn't coincident, the UGA and where the urban area of Issaquah Highlands ended. It's been super weird all the time. But for 20 years, this hasn't come up. This has been this kind of gap for 20 years, and all of a sudden it's come up now with the county wanting to reconcile some way.
Right, but it's odd because they own it.
They do own it.
So,
But it's zoned as open space.
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's got a conservation easement on it, so you can't do anything with it, even if you wanted to.
Got it.
Any other questions?
Yes, on 152, under the Parks, Recreation, Trails, and Open Space element.
Oh, no, all the way through transportation. Okay. How far?
So I don't know why this stuck out, and just tell me I'm wrong. If you go down to Growth Management Act requirements, the subheadings,
Okay.
are those subheadings supposed to all be in lowercase letters? It struck me as maybe it's just
Yes, it's a style thing.
for the whole thing? Is the whole
I
thing
believe
styled
it-
that way?
I believe yes.
Okay, you're right, because they're not yellowed in the other areas. Okay, thank you. And then there were a couple other things that I noticed that bother me personally, and that's what we call it like our city or our community, or I think it should be written, I think we should take out our. It's,
Don't personalize it?
yeah, to make it more
And
professional.
was that just in the parks element, or was that everywhere?
I found it in 2 or 3 places. I didn't,
So do a global search
yeah.
for your, our, yours, any personal pronouns.
It's just our, O-U-R. And then under Recreation and Conservation Office requirements? Oh, yeah, RCO. 1, 2, on the 3rd paragraph, number C. I didn't understand what both of those areas, what 2 areas?
I would say, and this is from the Park Strategic Plan. I would say that connecting the green necklace to, oh, it might be the public system and the private system? 'Cause I know
So that just needs
Parks
to, I
Department
think it
is
should be
big on
clarified.
both of them. Public vision. I'll have to ask, because you're right, it doesn't mention the private.
So I have
areas. I'm
highlight,
assuming
yeah,
it would
I
be
have
the public
highlighted.
system and the broader Issaquah to the Alps. But we'll see if we can ask them to.
So that's just not clear. I think I only have one more. Page 155. Sorry, Trish, I'll let you catch up.
And then the topic is,
I think it's Parks
before the
Goal
map?
A.
Parks Goal A?
Let's go to Parks Policy A1,
Okay.
and it's, go up to the second paragraph above that. That has lots of underlines.
This one? Okay.
Yeah. So this one seemed to have a lot of unnecessary verbiage in it. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
So it seems to me like we only basically need the first sentence, that we could add 20-year. The 20-year Park Strategic Plan identifies 51, take out strategic, 51 capital projects, and 4 operational projects. I don't know why we need to talk about near-term, far-term, midterm, and all of that. So that's just my own comment. You guys can read it and decide if it serves some purpose. And that's all I have.
And help me, did you want to take out the operational ones? So just,
No, just take out the word strategic after 51,
okay,
because that's what a strategic plan is. It's strategic. So
Okay.
we've already got that in there.
Okay.
And then if you add 20-year in front of, or after the, then I think every sentence after, period after projects, operational projects, and then everything after that, I'm not seeing why it needs to be in there.
Okay,
Okay.
gotcha.
Because all it does is talk about the strategic
Right.
plan, and that's what gets talked about in the strategic plan.
Right, okay.
But that's just me.
Comments from?
So I have a comment on the compact schools. In the definitions, there's compact schools, and it says compact schools are public schools and school-related buildings located outside central Issaquah. And then urban schools are a type of compact school located only in central Issaquah. So it seems very confusing to me that it says compact schools are public schools and school-related buildings located outside central Issaquah, and then urban schools are a type of compact school in the definition.
Right, and these definitions are in two different codes. The compact schools is only in the IMC, which is the citywide, and the urban school definition is only in the central standards, because there would only be urban schools in the central Issaquah area. So instead of having them duplicative, we tried to be real careful to only put it in the place that would actually need that definition. So we tried to be as clear as possible on both of them, but not be duplicating within the definitions of each other. Does that help to say why they're similar yet one is the big umbrella and the other, urban fits under the umbrella of compact, but only in central Issaquah?
I find it very confusing. I don't know if somebody who is looking at the codes or if the school district would understand what you just said as the two separate ones. It seems confusing to me that it specifically defines compact schools as schools located outside central Issaquah, and then it talks about urban schools being a type of compact school located only in central Issaquah.
Right, and I
So-
think what we're trying with the whole idea of schools now is to make them smaller footprints, taller, make them use the land. And so we want them to be compact citywide, with the urban schools in central Issaquah are even going to be more smaller footprint, more efficiently done, more fitting into the neighborhood, because there's a lot less land there, of course. And we're working on standards for those right now, but those will be coming along in the future. But right now, we only have compact school standards. So we knew coming into the comp plan that we should really have policies and definitions for both as well, to try and let folks know what's the difference and what's the same about them.
Can I add to that? No, I think the question is different, right? I mean, your question is, it's been defined in a way that doesn't make sense, right? If compact schools are only schools that can only be schools outside the central area, and urban schools are a type of compact school, then by definition, they couldn't be inside. So there's just there's something needs to go back, and there just has to be some sort of a word setup that, there's
There's a logistic problem.
there's
like
a language problem, right? There should be,
It's like a
you can
Venn
have like
diagram that
compact A and
doesn't
compact
connect.
B, and compact A is outside the central area,
Well,
and compact B is inside. I don't know, but it's just the definitions are.
It begs
Logically
the
weird.
other question of, you've got compact schools outside of central, you've got urban schools in central, so is there another school, right? Or do compact schools just become schools, right? I mean,
Seems like we
there's-
have two definitions.
there's two
One's compact
definitions.
and one's urban.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll work on that. I think there is an issue
You
there.
understand the
Yeah, I do.
point.
I do.
The rest of the definition, as far as pedestrian-friendly design and setting up for why you would have these definitions of different types of schools, makes sense. It's really just that element that seems like it would be confusing. And then another thing on the compact schools, I noticed that also in that part, there's some should. I don't know if these can be made
the policies?
into, yeah, in the
Oh.
policies, there's a lot of shoulds. I don't know if some of those can be made into shalls, but in the spirit of strengthening our policies, if that's possible.
And the.
So
land
these
use
would be
number?
LU, land use policy G3 through G7, which are the new ones about compact schools.
Oh, I missed you. Here we go, sorry.
Tell me when you get there, Trish.
I know, I'm just blur, everything is so blurry on the screen, it's like, am I there yet? Am I there yet? Well, let's take a look at them.
So like G4 has compact schools should be designed to allow bus and car access, yet prioritizing buses over cars. So can that be compact schools shall be designed to allow bus?
I'm gonna give that to Keith, because we worked on these with the district, and
I think that's fine.
Okay, so then the other one would be G6, compact school design shall use the least amount of land for development.
Yep.
In the engineering world, we get yelled at when we use should.
You can yell at us.
yeah, feel free.
I'm not yelling, I'm just saying in the engineering world, we get yelled at.
So far I have a G4 shall and a G6 shall, is that right? Did I get them, okay. That's it.
There is one in G3.
So shall reflect, okay, scarcity.
Yes.
Shall be located to offer.
Oh, so we were doing all of them, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Does 7 have one? Partner.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Buck the trend.
Is that, are some of these lifted from our last agenda bill tonight? Guess we'll get there.
Our last agenda bill. Oh, on
The
public
2019
buildings?
Comp plan?
The buildings?
This one's on compact
the-
schools, but it started with the,
Compact buildings?
Some of the public buildings is listed
the
as
next agenda
compact
bill.
schools.
No,
so it
because
went
that
way.
wouldn't be
They did
policy.
schools,
Yeah,
and
that
then they
wouldn't be
did
policy
public buildings,
language.
and they built on the.
The last one's the 19 docket.
Right. The next one's public buildings, though, that has all the compact code in it.
so you will want to retain all this for when we look at the last.
Anything else?
No. That was it for me. Do you have anything else?
That was it for me.
Okay. So the administration recommends adopting the amendments to the comprehensive plan, the Central Issaquah Plan, the Issaquah Municipal Code, and the Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so in the update, we will work on the definition issue between urban and compact schools. So that'll be in the update if you guys are moving it out of committee.
Oh,
Unless you want to see that again.
that's true.
That was the one thing that we had as a to-do.
I think we actually had a lot of changes,
Sure.
so I think maybe since there isn't a time, it isn't time
agree.
sensitive, we
So you
can
wanna
bring
see
it
it
back
again?
to committee.
So we'll do the red lines and bring it back next month.
Okay, and just to clarify, the parks piece that Stacy proposed, did you two want to do that?
Well, so one thing that I thought about the parks piece is the parks plan, those are going to be reviewed by planning policy comprehensively over the next year, right? They're going to be, that's part of, that's
Right.
part on their docket for this coming year.
Right, but hers wasn't a goal or a policy, hers was just some introduction language. And we're happy to make it just the one line, but I didn't want to do that if the other two had some connection to the language.
I think she's asking if you two agreed with Stacy's suggestion on the edit to the park paragraph, which I think we all thought was fine.
Yeah.
Okay,
we're
I
good.
didn't see any heads or anything, so I
I
just
nodded for
wanted to be
everybody.
sure. Okay.
Sorry, so can I ask one question on that, though? There was that piece about the impact fees in the part that is suggested to being removed. If that's going to be removed, is that somewhere else, and is it important that it be there? Because that seems to me like a little bit different than just stating what the park strategic plan is about.
If it's-
Oh, No, I think we talk about, there's probably policies for the park impact fees,
As in code.
right? And this is just sort of the intro.
Yeah, it's just,
There's definitely code.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then, yes, I would be
Okay,
fine with
and
that.
we'll clarify the other piece about the green necklace that you asked. What are the two things that it's talking about? Excellent.
Can I
And we'll
request
bring all the red lines back for March.
that'd be awesome. And I don't know how you plan to do it, but in the most efficient way possible for review. So
You have a suggestion on how you'd like to see it?
either a specific color for red lines that's different than any of the red, I didn't print it in color, but, so we can definitely tell what the red line changes are.
Okay.
Or
Or a chart?
Or if, or a chart. That works, or if it's easier to just include as the newest information, just the pages that had changes on them. Any of those, so that we don't have to,
Go through the whole thing.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Excellent.
Could I suggest
Yeah.
that in the information on the bill, where we have sort of the history of its movement through, we could put these we could put these topics listed there, and that allows us to very easily key which sections we would expect to see further changes to. Right, the topics that in the last 5 minutes we just
In the update section,
Yeah.
we can't go back to we have rules.
what? Say that again?
The clerk will hit me if I'm just kidding. So
She's
so
coming
that
over now.
the background section, the summary section is kind of set. And so when we do an update on the bill, there's an update section. And
Right.
so we can list it out in the update section.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sweet. Yeah, we can do that.
Maybe
Okay.
that's where the chart is.
Yeah.
So, so we are actually recommending that this return to Land and Shore with the
For one-
recommended
March
changes.
7th.
Excellent.
We sibling.
Okay, the next one.
So the next item is AB 7683, amendments to IMC 18.07480, Community Facilities Standards Regarding Public Buildings, presented by Trish Heinonen.
You can leave. Just wish me luck. Okay. You all, as Land and Shore, but not you all as individuals, saw this before in December, and you had some questions for us, and those were added to your packet. But just for those individuals that weren't here, the background on public buildings, it comes from when we first did compact schools. It was compact schools and government facilities. And PPC immediately took that part out because there was some goings-on about a school on the Hill, and they didn't want to talk about government facilities. So we focused on schools. We went all the way through and adopted the compact schools code, and then we came back for this part, which has gone through being called municipal buildings. I think it was government buildings at one point, and PPC landed on public buildings as the name of this. They thought it sounded better. So you all viewed it in December and asked us 3 follow-up questions. So just quickly, compact facilities, this is one of the amendments. It takes out the word schools and adds buildings and structures. So that was a pretty easy part for the purpose and intent. The definitions of public buildings, I'll let you read through it. We tried to capture everything and not capture the things that aren't public buildings. And just for reference, community space was already a definition that exists in the central standards. So, but we wanted to define public buildings, just to be sure. This is the code change. We also added, just from current planning's work with the schools on their newest proposals, we made a little bit of a tweak to the school part, which is footnote 7, that the FAR can be reduced by 50%, and I put the number in there for people that are math challenged, which might be me, that if needed for operational functions, and what they decided is that if it's required for academics curriculum, then it's considered operational. So a field could be used to help you meet your FAR. Other than that, the footnote 8 for public buildings, community space is not counted in the FAR calculation. So for example, if the community center came in now and the big open spot where we have concerts, that wouldn't be counted against the FAR. So that's what that means. This would be the change to the central standards, just letting folks know that they would need to go back to the IMC for a public building that went in central. There were many examples of our public buildings, the city's public buildings, and public buildings in the region that was connected to the agenda bill. And so now I'm at your 3 questions from last time, unless, do you want me to say, do you have any questions before I get to your questions from December? Okay. Your first question was, what's the difference between a build-to line and a setback? And a build-to line is the maximum that you can be from a street. So for a school, it would be the area where you might have the kids picked up, you might have a plaza, you might have some really neat things, but you could also be right up to the street if you wanted to be. A setback is the opposite. So you have to be so far away from the street. So you could be the 20-foot, if it's a 20-foot setback, you could be 20 feet or you could be 30 feet, because a setback is the opposite of a build-to line. Does that make sense?
But wasn't part of the question that a 0 to 20-foot build-to line, how does that differ from a 20-foot build-to line?
So I think what this represents is maybe a philosophic difference between the city and the school district. So the city, especially if this were to happen in one of our more urban areas, we try to push for a 0 set-to line. We want the building right behind the sidewalk, right behind the right-of-way. The school district has always expressed concern for security about being that close to the sidewalk with their potentially building entrance. And so what this represents is some flexibility given to the school district, understanding that they have safety issues that they're kind of responding to. But if that changes over time and they come to embrace a more urban outcome, we wanted to not have them at 20 feet. We wanted to let them go to 0 if they wanted to. So I think the reason why this is represented as a range, I think just reflects the difference from where the city is and where the school district are today. That make sense?
Okay, so
it offers some flexibility, but
no, I get that.
But the reason why we didn't go to a setback is we were willing to go to 20. We didn't want it to be farther than that, and so this is a way to guarantee that the building will be no farther than 20 feet off the property line.
Got it. So the 20-foot build-to line, I don't remember the exact call out back from December, but would mean that it would have to be exactly 20 feet?
They could be between 0 and 20.
No, if it
said
said
20, if it was a set to 20.
Look at this.
Yes.
Okay, the 4th column, build to line, in quotes, maximum setback from streets.
Yes.
20, writing underneath it, writing 20 feet is the same thing as writing 0 to 20 feet. If above, you've defined it as maximum setback from streets, right? That was my question. My question was, under some circumstances, is the maximum setback 0? In other circumstances, it's 20? And because 0 to 20, when you define it as the maximum setback, not the specific setback, then 20, the number 20 is every bit as good as the number.
So does taking out maximum?
Taking out 0 dash or taking out maximum setback from streets. It just, that's where the confusion
No, I hear
was
you.
last time.
I get it. I missed it last time. I get it now. So the question for Trish is that column trying to do 2 things? So if we have setbacks and set twos in the same column?
No, we shouldn't have used the word setback as in the parentheses. Because setback is a different thing, it's a different item.
Okay.
So you should just take out the maximum setback from streets and just say the build to line is 0 to 20 feet.
Right, because I think the
Okay.
build-to line is probably defined somewhere. Sorry for the confusion, I misunderstood the question
Deterministic engineering
there.
me feels much better.
Good, good, that makes me feel better.
Well, I just want to be clear for, people in the future as they go to build stuff. Thanks.
Thank
Yes.
you.
No, good clarification. I'm glad you answered our answer to your question.
My pleasure.
Let me turn this over.
I have two questions on this same topic. So the
Okay.
first one is, if this is all about the school district's preference for having some space, 20 feet for their entrance, their main entrance, and that's specific to schools, and then this is for schools and public buildings, would it be possible to have a zero build to line for public buildings aside from schools, since there are some differences between the needs for public buildings and schools?
We could, but then we wouldn't have the flexibility to put a plaza in front or something in front. I mean, we certainly
Right,
could.
but isn't some of the point of doing this work is to make for a more compact space, which would be potentially a
Right.
zero build to?
Right, we sure could. I'll turn that over to you since you're the
Wow.
current planner.
Is that what I am?
Well, between the two of us, you are.
So that's a great question. I think, and the code allows, so the code already allows a certain amount of the frontage to be set back beyond the set to line for things like plazas.
Okay, there's
So I
already
think
a
we're
way.
okay for a portion if we had a public plaza out front. All right. I am a believer that we need to walk the talk.
So yeah, and I have another comment that's sort of similar to that. It just seems like there's a lot, there's this effort to make these more compact buildings, and then there's a lot of wiggle room to kind of allow for exceptions, right? So,
I don't know what you mean. So tell me specifically, what do you think, Vicki? I mean, in terms of,
Yeah.
so what exceptions are you thinking?
Well, so there's this one, and then the other one that is, I don't know if we're going to talk about later, but the other one is the reduction of the 50% reduction of the FAR if needed for operational functions at the discretion of the director. So I think that can be another discussion point for us, but that would be it's another exception.
So I think what we realized in conversations with school district, and we also took a look at some of the fire stations that had been built, and for the fire stations specifically, there was the need for basically driveways to get in and out of bays. And so when you start to add that into the site area, the FAR gets really challenged because there's a lot of land that's used for vehicular maneuvering. Likewise, if we were going to build another community center, the likelihood that there'd be like a big green space out front as a public space is part of the composite of that kind of a use. And likewise, for the school district, the only way they can meet the FAR requirements with a field is to put it on the roof. And although that may be where we get to with the urban schools, with the compact schools, I think, it seemed like we weren't ready to go quite that far yet. So for example, these are going to apply to, and we have the advantage now of having some conversations about the potential middle school at Tallis, right? And that is a 3-story building. And all the parking is basically under building. And it has a field, it has a track, because that's what they build for middle schools, right? And so from an FAR standpoint, if you count the field and the track, they can't get to the 0.75 FAR. It's too low. But if you don't count that, they get there. And so the conversation that we had with PPC was, I think that they agreed that right now, where we are today, we're moving in the right direction. And maybe at some point, land will be so scarce that, yes, that track will be up on the roof of the building. but that's not where we are today. So I think we have some more information, which has led to this proposed kind of allowance, and looking at some of our own facilities and going, even though we want to try and be on as small a footprint as possible, there's just some physical needs that we have that will make it hard for us to hit those FAR numbers.
So, fire stations in Seattle. Seems like whenever I drive by a fire station in Seattle, there's a driveway apron and the trucks go in and out, and there's not this larger area in order for trucks to go in and turn around. They kind of tend to do that out in the street. So is it really necessary that we make an exception for that? I think it's a good question. I mean, if we're trying to be urban,
Right.
then are we trying to be urban or are we trying not to be? And if there is a way to be, to actually walk the talk,
Right.
I agree that we need to hold that line. And so is it really necessary to make exceptions for FAR based on needs that seem to be accommodated in other urban areas?
So I guess
Well, did we look at that or did we just?
we did look. We looked at it. I think. I mean, my sense is I hear what you're saying. For any building that we build, including the fire stations, because any fire station in the city is a city facility, you guys can ask those questions through the design process. You know, if we're to the point where we will be soon, I think, designing a new fire station, and if it's not on as small of a site and as compact of a footprint as you would expect, I think there would be some conversations with whoever the managing department will be of that design work, which would probably be parks, because that's facilities. What's the FAR? Does it meet? I mean, I think the goal would be to not require or to utilize the reduction of 50%, but personally, I like the allowance in code as opposed to having it go through some sort of director interpretation or administrative adjustment of standards that was not anticipated, because then it puts the administration in a much more difficult spot.
Well, it doesn't say you guys can look at that because it's at the director's discretion. So council doesn't get to see that.
Right. So,
Okay. So it looks from a cursory glance at the city of Seattle that for fire stations that open onto a total of 2-lane streets,
Yeah.
1 lane each way, that they have concrete setbacks for vehicle maneuvering, and that the only ones that are basically at the street are on when there's 2 lanes each way, to provide additional room. I'm comfortable with this language. I think it's understood. This isn't an exception that we're talking about for like wholesale businesses. It's operational systems for organizations that we have partnerships with. So I'm not too worried that anybody's going to try to like snooker us and get out of the spirit of this. Particularly as I take a quick look at how it works in Seattle.
Okay, so I have a clear.
Look,
I have-
all the stations in Seattle.
I looked at a half dozen. I said a cursory look.
Yeah, and so, sorry, along those, and I also feel that the 0 to 20 foot, I mean, I can envision the reason, or I can imagine the reasons, the safety reasons that school district is talking about.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think there are designs that can minimize that don't require a 20 feet back. And I think I think what we're really feeling is our discomfort or fear going from suburban to urban.
Right.
But it's not new. We're not the first community to do this. And so I'm a little bit concerned that we have code that expresses that discomfort and fear in certain ways, and then we start building, and we get suburban style, because that's what we've been doing for the last several years. So that's really, I think we can design our way toward these changes, or not. But if we don't require it in code, then it's very unlikely that we are going to get those urban designs, because we won't require it. That's my concern.
I have a follow-up question. You mentioned that this doesn't put, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you were saying that this way it doesn't put the director doesn't have to do an administrative adjustment of standards or something like that. But it seems to me that this still falls on the director to decide if it's necessary to have these functions.
It does. So I guess, so part of, as someone who believes I work for you guys, part of what I do is evaluate what I hear from you when I get requests for code amendments. And what I'm hearing clearly is that the expectation is that that both public facilities and schools meet the more urban standard, and if the allowance is allowed to remain, that shouldn't be granted without good justification. So if we need to capture that in some sort of language, I can think about that. Maybe we need to develop some criteria for that decision, because right now there's none, I don't think.
That's all there is
it's,
the
you
discretion
ask
of
and somehow I flip a coin. I don't know. So, I think what I'm hearing is, and you guys tell me, because I don't want to develop a bunch of criteria and have you guys say that's not where you wanted this to go. So if that might be a way to make this a softer land, then let's go ahead and put some criteria together for how you could get the reduction in FAR, and not just make it arbitrarily at the director's discretion.
Well, so for a administrative adjustment of standards, there are criteria.
Generally,
correct?
yes, but you could do specific ones for this particular adjustment.
Well, so what I'm wondering is, it seems to me that another way to have criteria would be to not allow specifically in the code for this, but then to use the administrative adjustment of standards criteria as they stand, if there is a necessary use that would cause you to reduce to a different FAR. The other thing is, I think reducing by 50% is a lot. So it seems to me like you have an operational function, then you get this reduction of 50%. I would like it to be you get a reduction to whatever. If you have an operational function and you need to have a reduction of 10%, then you just do that, and it doesn't allow you this. Now all of a sudden you have a 55%. If the tendency is to go towards the lower FAR, it seems like the way this is worded might give us that outcome of the 50% reduction. If you have
So you would
operational
want it to say the least amount of reduction up to 50%, or you wouldn't want to, because we were trying to put a stop gap in there that they couldn't go beyond, but
Right.
I see what you're saying, though. If they only need 10, they only get 10.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the exact wording is, but that's my concern with the way it is now, is that if you demonstrate that you can't meet that FAR, you get a reduction. Now you have a FAR requirement that's half of what it was before, and now you can build to that. So I'm not sure what the wording is exactly to strengthen that, but that's my concern.
What about saying that space needed for operational functions, it's the discretion of the director, I don't know how you say it, not counted towards the FAR, and then leave the FAR at 0.75?
Right, and that's how the plazas is handled. So would that work?
Sure. Yeah, that would work.
It's just not counted, so there's no reduction then.
So there would be a footnote, because you love footnotes.
I do, I really do.
And it would say that area needed for operational functions would not be included in the FAR calculation.
There's some vetting by you or one of your,
As determined
People.
by the director.
so somebody couldn't just
or
come
the
in and say, we
designated
need all
official.
this.
Use designated official. It's like
There we go.
terminology we use. Someday we'll be directorless.
So that may address my concern. I guess the issue, though, would be if you have, all of a sudden, you have an operational function that is perhaps going to take up a lot of space and maybe shouldn't be in the urban setting at all, and you have all of a sudden a very low FAR below the 50% is sort of the unintended consequence of that potential language. I'm not sure if that's likely, but it does open up that other possibility it opens up the possibility that if you had a need for a very large yard of storage for vehicles or something, now you can demonstrate that that's a use. Now that doesn't even count towards your FAR.
I almost like
Well,
the,
so that would be, so let's just take, for example, let's assume that at some point, this has been on a wish list for at least as long as I've been here, so 20 years. Brett has had the idea for a phase 2 of the Public Works Operations Yard, right? And that is a very low density use because it's a lot of fleet and it's a lot of equipment and it's, a bunch of garages and driving areas and bins and things like that. It will be hard to hit the FAR min or something like, the expansion of the Public Works Operations facility, would be my guess.
this is only for Central Issaquah.
Is this only for Central?
No, this is citywide
Citywide.
if you're zoned community facilities.
So, the school districts probably, they have a bus yard? They have a bus yard. So if they move their bus yard, this would apply to some other, maybe a redo of the admin office space at some point. And I don't know, they don't even know what they're going to use that for. But I think we're moving in the right direction. We have 2 schools that are probably going to be built and go through permitting in the next year, the middle school and possibly a high school. I think we're going to get a lot smarter about knowing what they can fit their facilities on. Maybe we look at it again after we get the first wave through. This definitely pushed them beyond where they wanted to go, which I think is a good step.
Well, after we get the first one, then how many more do you think there are going to be? It's not like,
2. We're going to get 2, so we're going to get a middle school and a high school.
yeah. So it would be, I prefer the suggestion that we have the standards that we want, and then we have the administrative adjustment of standards. And if that criteria is met, then we can adjust the standards.
So rather than exclude operational
Right.
facilities, you would rather keep it at an FAR that can be adjusted through an AAS process.
Yep. That's me.
What's the practical impact of that?
Well, so one of the reasons why we changed school standards to start with was basically the administration was issuing an AAS for every school that was coming in because they couldn't meet the standards of the community facilities. So we were doing AASs for taller buildings, for all sorts of stuff. And so part of, I think, our goal was to get out of that AAS situation because it could be unpredictable for an adjacent property owner, right? You look at the standards, it says, here's what it's going to be, and then they come in and it turns out to be something different because there was a number of AASs granted by the administration. So it kind of puts us at a difficult place, but I'm not being contrary to what you guys are debating right now. I think it's a good conversation, and
So let's play that out in an example.
Yeah,
School district wants to build a new bus yard,
yes.
right? So somebody says, oh, they have to build a bus yard, but it's got to be 0.75 FAR, so it'll be nice and high density. In one path, the director says, oh, but the buses are an operational function, right? And
Yep.
the adjacent property owner is surprised, potentially, by that decision. The other path, there's an administrative word,
Adjustment of standards.
adjustment of standards, and the adjoining property owner is potentially surprised. It doesn't, I'm struggling to understand what the difference is from sort of a
I think if the
community
code-
engagement.
So I think if the code says that we're not including operational areas, I can explain to the property owner that the yard is an operational area and it doesn't count towards the or the FAR calculation. It's different than saying, change the rules because the school district asked me to. So if you were the neighbor, which one of those sounds better? You get the same outcome either way, but one of them, the code says, this is how we calculate it. That's how we calculated it. The other one says, it gave us the ability to change the rules, and we did.
Well, the code as proposed here,
Well-
I don't think would allow you to build a bus yard, right? Because there's no way in God's green earth you could get
You'd have to
anywhere
hit the
close
point-
to
You'd have to hit the
0.375.
0.375.
Right.
They'd have to have
So-
a giant garage.
So the
giant carport.
code as written provides at least some small measure of surety.
Yes. Yes, it gives.
Then those other
it
two
gives
options don't.
Some flex, as written, there's some flexibility afforded.
Right, but there's a hard stop.
But there's a hard stop.
Because some might argue that a new bus barn would be better, that the fine folks of Preston might enjoy such a bus barn better than the residents of Issaquah.
They might.
So to put yet another wrinkle on it. So that kind of tells me I like the language as written better than the other two. And of course, they'll know they could come talk to you guys about if they had their heart set on a bus barn, they could try to convince you to allow an administrative adjustment. But you would have this that would say, look, the will of the
Right.
council is not to do those sort of things.
So what we have in front of us is something that they were at the table for and agreed to. So if they came back and said, we want to do a new bus barn and we can't hit the 375, I'd be like, Steve, you and Lisa Callan were at the table. What the heck? Or Ann Moore, I forgot who it was.
It's both.
And so, I think there's a better chance to hold their feet to the fire to this standard because they were party to its creation. Whatever that's worth.
Okay, well, I think, so my preference after this, I think, is that it may be reduced by 50%, but I think some language around that it will be reduced by the amount that is necessary up to a maximum reduction of 50%. Just to make that clear that
Yeah,
you're
I
not
think
like, now
that's-
you get a 50% off.
Yeah.
And then also, we keep talking a lot about the needs of the schools. This is now going to be public schools and public buildings. So I would like to see that differentiated. So if we're saying the 20-foot build-to line is specific to the needs of the schools, then for public buildings, we just have the 0. And
I'll just do another line.
You get a new
and have-
footnote, so you
Oh, I
could
was gonna put
you could
one
do
line.
0
I think-
public buildings and 0 to 20 for schools.
Okay, because I was going to do another line, one line for schools and one line for public buildings.
Oh, there you
Because
go.
coming soon, there'll be an urban schools line, so there'll be 3 lines.
okay, yeah, okay.
the final version.
And then that is my next.
Coming soon.
That is a question I had. So Keith, when you're talking about for urban schools, they may potentially have to have the play yard on top of the building or something. So, but that code is not,
Not there yet.
There yet,
We're-
okay.
We're getting there. And it's like, for me, think about like Franklin High School in Seattle. The school sits here and 3 blocks away is where the soccer field is. It's not even connected to the school buildings itself. And that may be where we end up with that next generation of schools in Central.
So and I appreciate that the school district took part in these conversations. I think as we get more into that urban feel, though, this outdoor space that is used for required academic, the outdoor space, that's why the FAR is low, I think, on a lot of these school properties. So to call that out as it being operational function that isn't included in the FAR, I think that gives a lot of allowance for the FAR being lower and having that more suburban feel. So especially as we get into the urban school code, I think it really needs to be a more urban feel,
Yep.
right? So we need to have those standards that really reflect a bigger difference towards the
Agreed.
urban.
I think we're probably going to have to address both the 20-foot, because I think the 20-foot is a leftover, and then I think the FAR allowance. We're going to have to push on those.
Right. And just a clarification, are we going with the AAS adjustment of standards other versus the director's discretion or criteria?
What is the will of this group? My thought was that we use this language about operational functions at the discretion of the director, but we make it clear that it's reduced by whatever's actually necessary, not by
get
just
that.
50% and with a maximum of 50% reduction.
So at this point, I don't support that because whatever necessary, it's just this negotiated, yeah. So at this point, I would support the AAS over this and that suggestion, you know. But I understand that's probably not the will of the committee, and that's fine.
Is there a way in the AAS to still have this floor of 50%?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
just flips the burden.
Yeah, so it would be, maybe reduced as necessary, or, I don't know, did you have any language yet over there?
No, I'm just
Okay,
writing all sorts of notes.
So, maybe requested to be reduced if needed by 50% for operational functions through the administrative adjustment of standards.
Do we have to get to closure today?
On this?
Yeah, what's the time sensitivity?
You don't have to. You've seen it twice,
You
but
keep
it's
it
not the
big-
same group, so.
Because what I kind of feel like, to try to get all
Sure.
three of us good with this, I'd like to suggest that you guys take a look at that AAS
Okay.
version of this and come back and let us know how the two compare
Yeah.
and take some time to sort of think about it. Would that
Yeah.
be fair?
That's fine. And to be clear, I wasn't just talking about the 50% reduction of the FIR. I feel the same way about the 0 to 20. So that
We'll think about that one too.
the burden needs to be on the applicant to show. And maybe it's a site that there isn't any other creative way to eliminate or mitigate the issues that the school district sees with putting a building next to the zero line. But leaves them the opportunity to convince the director that they can go to 20. So I think that's the fair way to do it. I mean, I think if we're trying to get to urban, rather than just doing the wishes, we provide opportunities for relaxing those standards when we have certain criteria that allows it to happen. And that way, the city's not put in the position where we have to say yes. The city's in the position where the applicant has to convince the city, has to be able to meet the criteria, and the city will approve it. That's what I
Okay.
prefer.
Why don't we, so I think we've heard some different variations.
Yeah.
Why don't we come back with options next time for each of those?
Okay.
And you guys can kind of debate pros and cons. We'll list you out some pros and cons, and then you guys can kind of talk through those next month.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Vicki?
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to go through the rest of your questions?
Sure.
Yes.
No! Oh, just kidding.
I know, it's pretty exciting.
Is that the first question?
That was just the first
Oh my
question.
gosh.
Which I would have thought was the easy question. But no.
How many more are there?
The question came up, when would the existing public buildings, what trigger is out there that would make them comply with these new standards? And obviously, all the new buildings would have to, but there's two different ways that we handle this sort of thing. In Central, when we rezoned and did the standards, of course, everything became non-conforming, except we don't call it that. We call out that all development needs to meet the standards except for these exceptions, and one of them is a change in land use category or remodels and additions that are, the cost equals or exceeds 50% of the latest King County assessed building value within 3 years. So it has to be a big enough remodel to start meeting the standards, but the caveat is to the fullest extent practical and feasible, which is a judgment call. So if you were the fire station on Newport and you wanted to put an addition on, depending on what the addition is, we probably wouldn't make you do structured parking, let's say. We would try to find as many of the urban pieces as we could require to the fullest extent practical and feasible.
So these are the same standards for private development, right?
Right.
Right, and so think about where Corner Bakery is. So that, if you can remember back far enough, that used to be Denny's. And they came in and they basically called it a remodel, but then they came into some issues once they actually got into the walls. But so when we dealt with that, it was going to be a significant remodel of an existing building. The code would say if it was a new building, it would have to be set to the back of the right-of-way for Gilman Boulevard, right? And so, even though this was a significant change to that structure, we weren't going to say you have to now move that structure to right behind the sidewalk on Gilman. We let them leave it where it was because that seemed like a reasonable outcome. But basically, they had to create an outdoor seating area. They had to create connections from the sidewalk to the front door. They had to do everything that was reasonable to make that project look like it was now part of Central as opposed to a 1980s Denny's building. So I think what we're suggesting here is this is the same standard for public facilities that we use for private now.
And if you're outside of Central, did someone have a question?
No, that was my straw.
Oh, I heard a noise. I was like, oh, who said something? If you're outside, we do call that non-conforming, and it says that if you want to expand or reconstruct, the criteria is that the expansion is compatible with the character and future neighborhood, which again is a little bit subjective, but it helps us to qualify if what they're trying to do
We're doing
compatible.
a Title 18
But part
code
of
update
this
this year. We might look at this language because
Right.
I'm not sure what that even means. So
Right.
I'm not sure there's a reason to have different criteria
Well, we
outside
tightened it up when we did Central
Yeah.
because this is so, but there's so much that's non-conforming, of course, because Issaquah is so old. And this is a great map of all the public facilities in the city. And
Except
then
you can't see it, so it's really not that great, so.
Oh, dang. Well, in your packet, it's the beautiful version, and we also have them listed by name of what they all are, and there's a little chart that says the ones in Central and the ones that aren't. Oh, it looks nice on my screen. And the third question. Oh, we got a
Sorry.
second
So
question.
when we were talking about the non-conforming based on compatibility with future neighborhood, that's going to be updated, you said, as part of
The
the
IMC.
code update, or is that?
So Trish
So this
just
is
made
not
a
the time
note.
to talk about
I saw her
that?
make a
Okay.
note that we need to talk to the consultants about this particular code language because it's soft. So,
Well, okay.
yeah, so
It's
we're,
difficult to know, but
I don't know what it means. So we're gonna, if I don't know what it means, it's gonna get changed. So we need
Right.
to, we're just starting this week.
okay, but it wouldn't be within the purview of the discussion around the code for public buildings to change this
No,
part.
Change
so-
it by then, no.
Okay.
This just is, if right now, this building came in for an expansion, this is what we would use to review the expansion, is the non-conforming. So the third question, and this was a fabulous question because we hadn't thought of this before, but we say in 16 that all new public schools and public buildings shall provide a minimum of 50% of the required parking and structures. And one of the Land and Shore members said, but how many acres outside of Issaquah, central Issaquah and the urban villages don't require that now? So that if it was this city hall, would we require this building when they expanded? Or if we put a new something, would we require those to have 50% structure? And they wouldn't have normally, as they do now in central and the villages. So there's 79 acres, and here's probably not a good map on here, but it's brilliant in your packet. But all the areas, the central business, cultural business district and the IC and mixed use, all there do not require 50% structured parking. So we'd be fine at saying that those areas wouldn't be required. If a public building went down there, they wouldn't be required to do, because if they weren't a public building, they wouldn't have to. So we would be making a public building do more than the private side. So we would be happy to change that if you so desired, which is, you're making a frowny face. You agreed with this at one time, but you could change your mind. That's perfectly okay. The point was we would be making a public building do more than we would make a private building do, located in the same area outside Central.
The way the code's currently written, right?
Correct.
Right, and I think we're good with that.
Correct, but
You and me are good with that, right?
Right. And we would be happy to change what we said in the public buildings, because in our heads, all of those areas now had to have 50% from the moratorium change, but again, that was only Central. So it helped us realize that we had missed those areas. Is it really confusing you?
I think what Tricia's
Do you want to take another shot at it?
is
Who asked that question?
Paul.
He's not here.
Well, I'm just wondering, so does it?
Just kidding.
Does it require a change to implement this, or this is what we are going to get with the current?
We, staff, proposed to change 16 in your packet that now says that all of these require the 50%.
Right.
We would propose to change it unless they are in the CBD, ICMU, or PO area.
Right, so right now, I mean, I think the question that was asked a month ago was, well, but where would we then be putting ourselves at a higher requirement than private sector? So that's what the map shows,
Right.
is where, if we were to build a public facility or a school in one of those areas that's at the southeast part of the city, we would be doing a higher standard than private development. And we think that's okay.
I think that's fine because you have, there also typically is more employees than there are at those private buildings.
Right.
And as soon as you don't have enough parking, it spills out onto the streets. And we have a lot of, so I'm fine with that.
Okay, great.
Seems like it also
so not changing
standardizes across the,
Yeah.
Okay,
gives
so
you
not to
a little
change
bit
this.
less
Excellent.
variation based on where you are, one side of the street versus the other, how much parking you would have for a public building that's in these different locations.
Great, then we will not change that.
Can I go back to the map that you characterized as very pretty, that didn't show up well
Both are,
on the-
which one, Tola? This
There
one?
we go.
Go with the dots.
Okay.
Yeah, you're missing a public building, which is
Kristen?
down at the bottom, south of City Hall. You've got City Hall South, and you've got the Parks office as 15. There's a building to the west of that, on the west side of First, right? That's also, it's half park space, and it's half the new teen cafe.
Yes.
Tola, you are on it. I
Only
will-
because I love the teen cafe.
I love it too. I love the name. I will mark that down.
Thanks.
anything else to bring back to you next time?
I have one question.
I have
So it's under E1, and it is about the approval criteria. And it says, community facility buildings and structures must meet all applicable design requirements of the sub-area in which they are located and shall be efficiently sited to use the smallest possible footprint while considering views of the forested hillsides from public spaces, et cetera. So my question is, what does it mean to use the smallest possible footprint while considering views? What's the intent of the while considering the views?
When PPC talked about this, they felt that the standards gave them the smallest possible footprint, but they wanted the part in Central that we worked through, that was one of the first amendments to Central, about defining what the views of the forested hillsides were, which is why it says from public spaces as defined. They didn't want that to be lost in the development of public buildings and schools. They wanted to be sure that not only were they in a smaller footprint, but that they, if they happened to be on a view corridor or something, that they would take advantage of that as well. So that was, PPC put that in. And we were fine with that, because depending on where the public building goes, it would be great if it was able to use the views. You know, like Sammamish's is, you know, they can see, and then the YMCA is underneath it, and they can see, and the library is above, and they all have this great view across.
Okay. Okay. Always. I think we had a similar discussion about something else where there was considering of the views, and I don't quite know how you do that with your building to take advantage of the view necessarily, but if it means something from the perspective of approval criteria, then.
Right, it's something right of Central that they wanted in here, because since this is not Central, they wanted it somehow to capture that.
Okay, and this would be used as approval criteria, so I guess somehow you have to have taken into consideration the views.
Right.
Okay.
So this is one of those things that will drive a property owner crazy when they're trying to develop or redevelop, because there's no certainty here. And so you're just really at the mercy of the plan reviewers. And so I would prefer that we find some other way that we can word this so that there's, just says kind of, we really like the view. I mean, it really doesn't say anything besides consider this. So someone who recently went through the process, I would strongly encourage language that creates more certainty. Or some stronger intent. Then I have some comments that won't take very long when I'm done.
Okay, I have one more. So on one of the footnotes on table 18.07480 is that for public buildings, community space is not counted in the FAR calculation. And I know that at PBC, and as you mentioned earlier, they talked about the community center and the big field and that serving a purpose. So I did wonder though, and so I understand the intent of why that footnote is there. But I did wonder, is there a plan to also sort of define what is a community space that's more appropriate for an urban area, especially if we think about, like, as we become more dense urban area and we have more a plaza feel that would be different maybe than a big open green lawn, or, you know, or maybe one of those, but then other areas, what's the more appropriate a more urban feel for the community space? Is there a conversation to be had around that?
Right, well, I think just because there'll be a lot less land, we won't have the luxury of having that much land for a community center in the future as we did here. But, so I think that just comes with it, that we'll have to figure out how to pack things in tighter than we do on the valley floor over in the old place. But we haven't talked, other than the central standards, talk very specifically about urban plazas and what they should have and what they should look like and sort of the components they need to have. And because of the green necklace and fitting those pieces in, that's part of what's going to be updated in the land use code overhaul. So there might be a chance to just talk about it then.
So we're gonna, so the kickoff meeting with our consultants, if you guys don't know, we picked Makers, EHC, Burger Partnership, and an attorney that they chose. So the kickoff meeting with the Parks Department's next week, Wednesday, weather behaving. And I think we can start to ask some of those questions because their idea, so the good news is the team that we chose used Burger Partnership, who did the strategic plan for the Parks Department. That was the consultant that they used. So I think we're going to have some good continuity between the vision that was in that strategic plan and actually now turning it into code language. So one of the conversations that I think we can have is, okay, as you start to reshape chapters 7 and 13 from the SIDS, which is community spaces, you know, what are those community spaces more looking like? I think we can maybe put some meat on that as part of that process. So stay tuned, and we can maybe have some reporting out on that as we move that through.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it is, in my mind, it's more than just, you know, now we have less space. I think there's ways to accommodate the same sort of functions that you need, but now that you do have less space, you would accommodate them in a different way than you would if you had more space. And so I think there's a conversation to be had around that. Councilmember Goodman?
Okay. So starting with the definition of community space.
Oh, in Central?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just think can be shortened up. It can, the umbrella term designated for, all of that can be eliminated. And it can just be, and then you can add public land containing resource protection, recreation, or amenity. You can put public amenity or other amenity if you want, such as parks. I don't know why we need active or passive in there, and the reason I say that is because the extent that there might be some other type of park, somebody might argue that the more specificity sometimes, the not as good as it could be. So I would take out active or passive, and then instead of like, I would put similar. I just think it makes it a little bit cleaner. Then we have a definition of public buildings, which includes a building or a structure, but yet we start with, very quickly down on A4 under compact facilities, saying public buildings and structures. So I think we probably need to do a global search and take out, every time we see public buildings followed by and structures, just take out and structures, because public building, the definition includes structures. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. In D1, tell me if I'm going too fast, Trish.
Right. D1, I'm there.
D1,
There's a structure right there.
yeah, there's one. I have a note in here that says, a public building, which should be that houses all or a majority of a public utility facility must be compatible with the architectural form of the area or sub-area within which it is located. So are we trying to say the stricter of the two, the area or the sub-area?
Right, so, and this is public utility facilities, so, as the heading under D. And so if it's in Old Town and it's a pole, some kind of a pole, it would have to meet the Front Street poles. If it's in the Highlands, it would have to meet the Highlands pole standards that they have up there. It's trying to say that,
I think I know what it's trying to say.
right,
So,
is it not clear?
well, are we trying to say that if there is a sub-area within a sub-area plan within an area plan, then it must comply with a sub-area plan.
Right, some areas don't have sub-area plans.
Right.
Like if it's in South Cove, that doesn't have a sub-area. It would just be, the area of South Cove might have its own poles, or it might have its own,
But we don't want to
Whatever.
give the applicant a choice. So we want to say the stricter or the narrower of the two.
okay.
You see
so
what I
how would
mean?
How would you say that, yes? How would
Either-
you,
Either way, I guess, the more,
we just say that,
the most
whichever is
restrictive.
the
yeah,
most
well,
restrictive? Okay.
Yeah. Most restrictive.
Okay.
And then D3, the highlighted says, and shall be consistent with. Don't we want it just to have it comply with?
If that's the right term, to comply with wireless, or are you
Yep.
consistent with wireless?
Yeah, we don't,
Comply with?
we're looking at D3. You don't have it? So it says, public
So
utility
comply?
structures.
So
such
that's
as-
true, because comply is,
You want it to comply with it, you don't want it to be consistent with, you want it to actually comply.
If it's saying comply with code.
Right.
okay,
say comply with code.
okay.
And then down 11, under major, it says major or minor utilities that will be cited.
Okay,
And then it says, or an alternative analysis report as well as the aforementioned criteria of this section.
oh, that was just a typo of aforementioned, I'm not sure why that.
I don't know
highlighted.
what aforementioned criteria of this section means. Report as well as the, and then spell it out, which sections it has to be. Shall meet the following criteria for an alternative analysis report as well as sections blah, blah, blah. Make it specific about what it has to meet.
Okay,
On E, E2, E. Shall use the development standards in Table 18.07.480. Again, that should just be shall comply with. And in the first part, it says, sites used for public buildings, including accessory uses such as administrative offices. I don't know why was that added? Is our administrative offices that are part of public buildings or accessory
They would
uses to public buildings, are those not part of public buildings?
they would still be, I know we talked about for schools, their accessory offices are still considered schools, but for public buildings, you wouldn't have to make that separate.
Okay, so that's kind of what I thought you meant. And so I would, if necessary, I would go back and look at the definition of the public schools and make sure that you have covered accessory uses such as administrative uses. We should capture all that in the definition. We shouldn't be doing one-offs in different parts of the code. So all school facilities should be included in the definition,
Right,
even if they're not classrooms,
right.
right? Okay. And then, since we have a definition of public schools, do we have a definition of public schools somewhere? Or just compact
We
schools?
do in the comp plan. That was in the comp plan agenda, Bill. The compact and, that we're going to fix, the compact and umbrella.
Okay.
Compact and urban.
Okay. If we have a definition of public school somewhere that we're using, then we should change all of the references to public schools in here to capitals. capital P, capital S. But you need to check that because I don't know.
Right, because I'm not
where
sure
that
we
is.
have, I think that's why we put it in the comp plan, because we
Yeah.
realized we didn't have it defined.
That's what I have.
Great, thank you.
It's coming back.
Okay. So move to recommend that this comes back to Land and Shore Committee with the recommended changes.
Excellent.
And the discussion of alternatives
Pros and cons, all that good stuff.
that we requested.
Excellent. Ready for the next one?
Yep.
Right. So the next item is AB 7726, 2019, Docket of Comprehensive Plan Amendments.
This one, I'm not even going to say it, should be fairly straightforward. Even though you just did the comp plan amendments from last year, you also get to do the comprehensive plan amendments for this coming year. And this is the docket process. PPC had their public hearing in January. You review the list, send it back to council for their approval, and then we start working on them and hopefully get it to you in December and not in February. But we had some fun things happen at the end of last year. This is different than in your packet, partly because of the strategic plan meeting we had yesterday. I thought I should put some placeholders in here just in case what might come out of the strategic plan. So I put a placeholder in transportation, I put a placeholder in the land use element, and I think I put another one in for the Central Issaquah plan, just in case something should be needed there. So those are in red, those are new from your packet. And the other pieces that are new from Planning Policy Commission's public hearing is we actually heard back from the other departments on properties that would probably need to be rezoned and redesignated to community facilities. Some of them might not quite be ready by the time we're at the end of the year, but we wanted to put them all in the bucket in case we needed to rezone and redesignate them and not wait until, so we wouldn't have to wait till next year. But again, we were being optimistic that all of these would be ready, all 6 of them, but again, they might be placeholders. We heard.
Can I ask
Sure.
a question? Sorry. So this is we've heard a couple times tonight things that are new from the packet. I get nervous when we are reviewing things that are new from the packet,
Okay.
right? Both from a public transparency standpoint and from my ability to prep for a meeting standpoint.
Right, apologize.
So how do is there something, these were late breaking because PPC
no.
was,
They're new from the Land and Shore packet. There's just the only ones that are new from the Land and Shore packet is the strategic plan items in red. The other ones were in your attachment to Land and Shore packet. Does that make sense?
nope.
Okay, when you got your Land and Shore packet, there was
When I call up, on Friday afternoon, when I
Right.
went onto the city's website and called
Right.
up the Land and Shore packet,
right, there was an attachment of an updated docket that had a couple items in red. And that was the 6 properties and the stormwater plan.
I don't think that's how the city's website works.
I'm actually confused because I think I downloaded this Friday. It's not in red, but it does have all the
Yeah.
words that are up there in red.
Mine too. Well,
Not all of them, but on the first one, on the number 4, it does have the words. So I'm a little confused too. but-
number 5 does not.
Yeah.
And I printed mine this morning.
Because again, the strategic plan I just added this morning after yesterday's discussion. I thought I should add some placeholders
So you
for
should
that.
have done maybe a different color than red for what you just did. So, because it's confusing. I'm sorry.
Well, so some of them are, I think some of them So on number 4, that was in all the stuff that's in red was actually already in the packet, but then the red that's on 5 and 6 is not what's in the packet. So it is a little confusing.
Okay.
I don't know, so, but did you say that now, currently, if you were to download it from the city's website, there would be this version that's up there now? No, okay.
Only in the land and, well, without the strategic, I thought the stormwater plan made it into the land and shore version, because we heard about that last week.
So it was number 6. So,
No, not B.
It does not.
Okay.
So
So to your point, confusion at committee. So Trish, is this agenda bill need to go back to council at the next meeting? Or can it wait and come back to
wait,
committee?
I'm really not, I'm not throwing up that large of a red flag. I'm just saying, I get sometimes, and I'm not the committee chair, but I'm just asking, I know sometimes things come up at the last minute,
Right.
and there have to be, and the administration proposes to make changes after the packet comes out on Friday. But I'm just asking if there were things here that could have been in the packet on Friday, and are there easy changes
So-
that can be made if it's relationships back to council meetings or relationships back to PPC or whatever to help minimize this?
Sure. So maybe as a better process, it would have been good to have gone through this docket as it was in the packet and then say, oh, and by the way, since the strategic plan is going to potentially be adopted sometime during this year, would the committee recommend or support a recommendation to add some additional things to this proposed docket that would reflect that change that's going to happen mid-year? So Trish has already populated, I think, her proposed docket
Right, sorry.
with that, and I think that's causing a little bit of confusion. Now, 6B, I don't know what the deal is with 6B. 6B, I think, wasn't that.
Yeah. I apologize. I thought that was in the one that I sent to be
But
in
what
the
I thought
agenda.
Trish said was the only things, so if you can go back up to 1, Trish. So you see 1D is related to the strategic plan. So that's not in your packet, but that's
Right.
up there.
Right.
So that's a suggestion that she add that based on what we're doing with the strategic plan, as well as 3E.
So are these new ones that are related to the strategic plan, were those vetted and approved by the PPC, or is that, okay?
No, because they haven't been involved in that at all, but it's more of a placeholder, that if something should come out of the strategic plan, that we would be able to put it into this year's comp plan and not have to wait till next year.
So doesn't the Planning Policy Commission approve the docket, though, and
They
I mean,
recommend, but often changes come to Land and Shore, because you're the last stop before it gets approved as the final.
Okay.
So the question might be to the city attorney is, because that was not part of the hearing, right? Do we need to go back to PPC to add the strategic plan piece to the docket?
To the docket? Oh, just in my history, we've never had to go back, because the council obviously can change PPC's recommendation.
Yeah, but if the hearing, but
The
it should be
hearing
based
isn't
on the
in-
hearing.
Yep.
And so if PPC
Right.
talked about their strategic plan and chose not to put a recommendation forward, it's different than us adding something at committee that wasn't part of the world of the hearing. But that's why I'm not saying that. I'm saying we should need to check with the city attorney to make sure we're not running afoul of that.
Okay. Because if we had to go back to PPC, I would strike it from the docket.
Well, yeah.
It just seems silly. But, I mean, it's not the
I don't
amendment.
Wait a minute, I don't understand what you just said.
There's a
Because
hearing
it's
for
not
the
an
docket.
amendment, it's just the docket, it's just the list. but-
Is there a hearing for the docket?
Isn't
There was.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the issue. So if you need a hearing for the docket, and then you add to the docket later, if it's a substantive change, I would think that that is a legitimate question about whether you need to go back to have a hearing.
Do you think this is a substantive change? Or is that the question for the attorney?
That's the
I
question for
think,
the attorney.
yeah.
If I was a PBC member, I would think it was a substantive change.
Yeah.
I agree. I also think that I think it's something that, I think it's something that belongs on the docket. I think it's a good addition, but I also think that, the Planning Policy Commission might have other places that they think the strategic plan could affect the comprehensive plan amendments, or, I don't know, I think maybe that gives them also the opportunity to review the docket.
So I'm trying to understand the reaction that if it required another hearing, that it would be better to strike it, because it just seems like have another hearing. Good.
Right, I'm just thinking process, we have a lot of stuff going on at PPC, and we only have 6 members now, because you all just chose one to be on your group, which is great, because we do have great members. So I was just thinking of, I'd have to advertise again, I'd have to send out notice again, I'd have to do the whole piece, when, in my mind, it's a list. It's not an amendment, it's not actually changing anything, it's just a placeholder. So to me, it's not a significant piece, but I'm not an attorney.
Yeah,
You're going to talk to Jim.
We will talk to Jim.
okay.
Right. I'm
Thank
just
you.
making my case.
So if it's not, so can we make a couple of decisions? One is, if it's not, if it's the attorney's opinion that it doesn't need to go back, then I'm fine with the docket.
I did have some questions.
Sure.
Okay, so one of my questions is on the land use element. Land use element B, update is needed regarding shoreline master program update. This is, so you're nodding.
So we got a grant from Department of Ecology to update our SMP. And we just went through consultant interviews and selected Watershed Company. So Watershed Company is going to help us update our shoreline master program. And if there's any policies that come out of that, they would be then pulled into the comp plan.
Okay, and this is also the comp plan docket that goes with PPC, but would that also be the rivers and streams?
So the SMP update would go to River and Streams.
Okay, so it's on the docket for, I guess maybe I don't completely understand why then it's on the docket here for, so this would be also for,
The existing land use element has policies that relate to
that
our
don't go to the
existing
Planning Policy
shoreline master
Commission.
program. So if anything changes that would change what we say now in the comp plan through the update, we'd have to change that too.
would it also go back to Planning Policy
Yes.
Commission? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, oh,
So it
yeah.
goes to both, but
Yes.
the bulk of the work would be by the rivers and streams, because as I read the rivers and
Well,
streams.
so the bulk of the work will be the consultant,
Okay.
right?
And
And the
then-
presentation will be made to River and Streams, and they will get an opportunity to weigh in on whatever's being proposed before it goes to PPC.
PPC only looks at the policy pieces. They don't look at the technical pieces. Their role is just the policy pieces of shoreline.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, but they're the primary
It'll be the first public touch.
first public touch, okay. So that was my question on that one, and then also I think there is a lot of interest from the public around the Issaquah treasures, which is on the comp plan docket, and so I was interested in sort of preview of what this may look like.
Keith, you want to take that one?
It's a super great question.
Super great.
I'm going to do my best. This is a dry run for PPC. So we are going to start by just having a unbounded conversation with PPC about the treasures. And what I mean by that is right now the treasures are a combination of some physical things and some more aspirational things, some things that might be able to be protected and some things that we may not be able to protect. And right now they live in the comp plan land use appendix B, 2?
Appendix, we'll just go volume 2.
Volume 2. So there's a lot of conversation about what are they what do we want them to be if we're going to update them? Where should it live? Should it live in like volume 2 of the comp plan land use section where nobody can find it? Should it be aspirational? Should it be things that we want to actually manage? And if so, then there needs to be code to go along with protection if that's where we're going to go. So there's going to, before the administration comes out with here's what we think it should be, I think what we're going to have is just dial up, let's all have a cup of coffee and talk about this and see where it wants to go, because it really has not been talked about since 1992. 1992? 1993. So it's a long time. And so I think, it's come up here and there over the past couple years. And I think we want to just start with a conversation before we start, I think, trying to push it down a particular path.
And also a footnote to that is when we have the meeting, we're trying to have that discussion on February 14th. And I'm trying to, because that's the next meeting, and we're trying to notify any of the owners of the treasures like Bohm's, Village Theater, the Mercantile Building, and Salmon Days. We're going to invite the Chamber and Dia so that they can be there when we're talking about pieces that they're involved in, so they can be part of the conversation.
Thank you. So procedurally, we have an outstanding question about the changes that are made to the docket, and I think we're not ready to take action until, we're not ready to take action because we're not going to get that answer tonight from the attorney. Is that correct? Or
Can we decide that if we find out from the attorney that it does not need to go back, then can we, what's the next path that goes to the council?
So what I heard, how about this, was if the city attorney believes that adding the strategic plan items to the comp plan docket is substantively outside of the scope considered by PPC and needs to be redone as part of the hearing, then I think we need to procedurally talk about how to accomplish that, because we think that's the right outcome. If he says it's not, then I think it would be ready to go with that included. So either it would be on the council, if you guys want it, it could be on the council agenda whenever Trish can get it done, or we've got to loop back around. And maybe it can even be done in 2 pieces, where they can approve maybe a portion of the docket, and then maybe this one comes later?
Oh.
Or would you want to keep it all together?
I think because it's supposed to keep it all together, that
Okay.
you'd want to be together.
All right.
But
Okay.
we would just
That's
be
why I don't-
starting some of them, like the treasures, before it was adopted, but
Okay.
figure that's
So
gonna
how's
stand.
that sound?
Sure.
So conditionally approved pending
Yes.
review.
Pending
Review.
input from the city attorney.
Okay, so I'll move to conditionally approve the docket as shown this evening, additional on the approval of the city attorney.
Okay.
Second.
And then we can let you guys know what Jim says tomorrow.
Okay.
We should be able to connect with him tomorrow.
right.
And then does it go back to the council for referral back out, or is it?
It would, so what you do at council, it would be
council
for
would ap-
approval.
yeah,
It
for
approves the
approval.
docket, and then we start working on it.
Can we just,
Goes to
yeah.
PP. Okay, we refer it to PPC. Yep.
Okay, and then do we have a strong feeling on whether it should be on consent or not if it were to be?
Cool. I'm trying to move as many things to consent, since we do most of our substantive work is at committee. It makes sense. Otherwise, we're just doing the work again.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay.
All those in favor of the motion? Aye.
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 Make it efficient.
Opposed?
Abstain?
No.
Okay. All right, so nothing further. Next meeting is currently scheduled for March 7th, 2019, here in council chambers.
So
And
one question for the chair. Something, you guys have, you guys have approved a pretty significant work plan for development services this year. And I guess the question for the committee is, do you want monthly updates on some of those things, like, you know, the Shoreline Master Plan update, sign code update, Title 18 update, Old Town Plan, design standards, you know, it goes on and on. I mean, we got a huge amount of stuff that's happening, and not all of it is coming to you guys for a long time, because it's going to take a long time to gestate. And so the question is, do you want kind of a monthly update on just project progress? And if so, we can put that as a standard agenda item at the end of the committee.
So I am very much interested in that, because I think a lot of these longer term work plan items are, there are things happening in the background, and it's helpful to be able to keep on track on top of that. And I think it helps with the Council Infrastructure Committee to have that sort of table where you can see where things are in the process, and then see how the table changes over time as projects get completed. So I would be very much in favor and open to suggestions from my fellow council members.
I support my chair.
So from infrastructure, it's been probably 3 years ago now, and we were getting monthly updates from Sheldon Lynn, and so at some point I asked the chair, can we get them in writing in the table that Councilmember Hunt's talking about, which was super helpful, because then we could, rather than just getting a verbal report and us having to try to think about questions on the fly, we could look at the table. It also is in writing so that it's in the packet and the public can see it as well.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to sit and watch the meeting or go look at the meeting. And then that table has been expanded over the past couple of years. And so I guess I would encourage you to talk with Sheldon or look at his table and do something similar, because I think it's really been a great addition.
Yeah, and I'll just add, the most recent addition, I think, is that now there's a column that has just a short description, so that doesn't have to be updated every time. It's just, the one time, but then the public can also see, you know, what is the stormwater master plan, and then there's that definition there too, so that also, I think, adds to that transparency, and also helps keep track of what the different items are. And I don't think it's just a one-time column that you would add, and helps keep track of everything that much better. So.
Okay. Dan, can you ask Sheldon for the table of project updates that he uses at Infrastructure Committee, so we can look at it and adapt one for Land and Shore?
Yeah. Is there anything further? No. Okay. Well, thank you. So the next meeting is currently scheduled for March 7th, 2019, here in Council Chambers. And with that, we are adjourned.